Russia's global oil network is starting to feel the strain. For the past few years, Moscow has relied on India as a crucial outlet for its crude, shipping millions of barrels a day to refineries like Nayara Energy, which is part owned by Russia's Rosneft. But now one of those refineries is in trouble. The massive Vadinar plant in India has been hit by Western sanctions. Crude supplies are being disrupted, exports are collapsing, and profits are shrinking fast. For Russia, this is a serious blow. One of its few foreign refining footholds is now struggling to stay operational. And for India, it's a warning shot, a reminder that when Russia gets sanctioned, the pain doesn't stop at its borders. In this video, we'll look at how the sanctions have choked Nayara's operations, what this means for Russia's oil revenues, and how India is now being affected by the sanctions applying to Russian oil. Hi, welcome back to the channel. As I'm sure you'll be aware, over the past few years, the relationship between Russia and India has become much stronger, particularly when we're talking about Russian oil going to India. And the second largest oil refinery in India, the Vadinar refinery, which is owned by a company called Nayara, is actually owned by Russia. Technically, 49.1% is owned by Rosneft, the large Russian oil business. However, the remaining shareholding is held by Russian private equity businesses. So whilst this is run by Indian operators and it's obviously based in India, it's essentially a Russian refinery that's sitting outside of Russia. And as a result of that, and the fact that this refinery buys huge quantities of Russian crude, it was hit by sanctions by the European Union in July. And as a result of those sanctions, the refinery is now struggling. If we take a look at the numbers that the refinery was delivering prior to the sanctions hitting, you can see that in 2024, it delivered over $18 billion worth of revenue, turned a profit of just under $1.5 billion, and had a run rate of 100% utilization. So it was processing 400,000 barrels of oil every single day. And this is a high margin business because, as we've talked about before, crude oil isn't actually that useful to a lot of end users. They need to have products like gasoline, diesel, kerosene, jet fuel. That's what you can actually put into your vehicles to make them go. So India has been buying large quantities of Russian crude, passing it through its refinery process and making large profits. And in 2024, this refinery exported 138,000 barrels of refined products every single day. And just before we go on any further today, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet, I know that more than 50% of you watching these videos are not subscribers, to hit that subscriber button. It would just make me a bit happier and put a smile on my face. Now, I always like to learn something whenever I'm doing any research on these videos. And I've learned today about something called the Nelson complexity, which measures how complex a refinery is. And it goes from 1 to 16. So if you're an expert in this field, then you can skip this part of the video. But I think most of us have probably never heard of the Nelson complexity. So I thought it was worth having a quick look. So you can see here I've broken down the different levels of the next Nelson complexity. So levels 1 and 2, which obviously are the basic levels, that's just simple topping. So these are the refineries that only distill crude into basic fractions, such as naphtha, kerosene, and fuel oil. So most end users can't use those products, and these tend to be small regional plants. A level of 6 to 8 is classified as a medium refinery, and these refineries add what's called cracking and can make diesel and petrol. So that's usually a national refinery. Now, 10 to 12, which is where the Nayara Vadinar refinery sits, can do deep conversion. So they can process heavy crude into premium fuels because there are different grades of crude oil. So some of it is easier to convert than others. So you have to have an advanced refinery to be able to handle most of the Russian crude. We've then got levels 14 to 16, which are ultra complex and integrated, and they're adding petrochemicals, cokers, hydrocrackers, and they maximize the value. So we've got a refinery here that is right at the top end of the Nelson complexity. So that makes it highly valuable and also it's producing really good fuel. So everything was going fantastically well for the Vadinar refinery up until the summer of 2025, when the European Union decided that it was going to apply sanctions against that refinery because of the huge amounts of Russian crude that it's been buying, and also because of the ownership structure. It's basically a Russian facility that's sitting on Indian soil. And as a result of those sanctions, the refinery suddenly lost its supplies from Saudi Arabia and Iraq, because it was actually sourcing some oil from other suppliers, not just Russia. And it also faced problems with regards to shipping, insurance, and banking and payments. So basically, it can now only deal with countries that don't care about the sanctions. Any country that is concerned about being hit by secondary sanctions, which is most countries in the world, no longer want to deal with this refinery. And as a direct result of those sanctions, the throughput at this refinery has now reduced significantly. You can see from this table that previously it was handling 400,000 barrels of oil per day. Now that's down to around 280,000 to 300. And it was exporting 138,000 barrels per day. The exports are now down to around 80,000. So the utilization rate currently is down to between 70 and 80%. And that's only a few months after sanctions kicked in. So you can imagine, as we go through the longer period and these sanctions remain in place, that this could be hugely damaging for this refinery. And the problem that this refinery has, or any refinery has, is that it has a lot of fixed costs. So a lot of its costs don't change if you reduce the throughput. And if we have a look at what this means in terms of the financials, well, as we talked about before, in 2024, this business was estimated to make around $1.5 billion worth of profit. It's making a margin of somewhere around $10 to $12 per barrel of oil. So that's pretty high margin for a business that's basically just buying in crude, processing it, and then selling it on. Now, where we are at the moment, if the refinery continues to operate at the current levels, it's likely that that margin will be down to between $4 and $5 per barrel. So we're talking a refinery that's going from producing $1.5 billion worth of profit to potentially now only breaking even. And the reason for that is because it has to run everything. It still needs the same number of employees. It still has to use the same level of power. And as with any fixed cost business, if you see a reduction in your volumes, it comes straight off your bottom line. So this is an absolute nightmare. And as I've said, this is just the initial implications. If we see further volume falls as a result of this business not being able to export as many barrels of oil per day as it could, it will just have to cut down on its capacity, and therefore will go into a loss-making situation very quickly. So all of this represents bad news for the Russian owners of this refinery, but it also represents bad news for India, because this facility provides 8% of India's total refining capacity. So it's a key supplier into the Indian market. It's processing 400,000 barrels per day, or it was, and it's exporting 138,000, or it was, it's not anymore. So that means that around about 250,000 of those barrels are going to India. So they're being used by Indian consumers. So if we see continued reductions in capacity, that's going to have serious implications for the supplies within India. And this refinery was making most of its profits from the exports. That's a very valuable market. So as those exports go down, it's going to put more financial pressure onto the business. And so it may need to raise prices in India itself. So this could have a really big implication on the cost of fuel in India. And of course, when you've got Russian owners, they're not making the decisions based on what's best for India. They're making decisions based on financial analysis. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because we've been talking about the sanctions for a long time, more than 3 years now. And I get a lot of messages from people saying the sanctions aren't working, you keep posting videos, nothing's really happening. So I wanted to post this update just to show a real life example of problems that are now being caused for Russia and also India as a result of the latest round of sanctions. As you've heard in today's video, Russia thought that it was a good idea to set up a mega refinery in India. It's basically the owner of that Indian refinery. Now, some of that product goes into India, around about just over half of the product has been going to India historically, but it's been making money from selling that oil to lots of other countries through its exports. Now, as a result of the sanctions, it's severely limited the countries that want to buy that oil. So that's caused a problem for the refinery in the first place. It was also buying in oil from other countries, Saudi Arabia and Iraq. They've cut those supplies because they don't want to be associated with the refinery and run the risk of secondary sanctions. So it's now fully dependent on Russian oil, which is actually making the situation worse in terms of trying to avoid sanctions. But I guess once you've been sanctioned, you're always sanctioned until this war ends. So the refinery is now suffering as a result of its loss of export markets and also the fact that it's a very high fixed cost business. So it hasn't been able to reduce its costs as income has been coming down. And as a result of that, its profits have now been wiped out. So it's estimated it might be breaking even at the moment, but if volumes continue falling, then it's likely that we'll see it moving into a loss-making situation. And as oil prices come down around the world with the global slowdown and the increases in oil supplies from OPEC+, that's going to make it worse as well because the end sale price of the refined products will be lower. And so the profit margins will fall further from where they are right now. So this refinery is now basically reliant upon the Indian market. But from India's point of view, it's also reliant upon this refinery because it's been supplying about 8% of India's oil. So we've got a situation where it's symbiotic. Everybody needs everybody within India. But the problem that India is now facing is that the European Union and the USA are now targeting all of these companies that are continuing to buy Russian oil. And they've been told that if this continues, then they will face sanctions as well. And we saw that recently. Donald Trump introduced a 50% tariff on all Indian imports into the USA because India is still buying Russian oil. So India is now paying the penalty for buying all of these huge quantities. So there may come a point when the Indian authorities say enough is enough. Maybe this isn't the smartest move. Maybe we should start buying oil from elsewhere, which isn't going to cost that much more. They are getting a discount from Russia, but it's not that much. It wouldn't materially change the economics within India as much as losing all of their export markets would, or if all Indian companies get sanctioned. So the overall summary of today's video is that we've seen a hugely profitable business within India going from profits to losses almost overnight as a result of the sanctions being applied directly against that refinery. And this refinery is owned by Russia. So I don't know why it wasn't sanctioned in the first place. It's taken quite a long time for some of these really useful sanctions to actually be put into place. This was in the 18th round of sanctions that was announced by the European Union. So it took a while, but they got there in the end. This is really bad news for Russia because they're now losing the revenue that they were earning from that refinery. And also, they were shipping huge quantities of crude to that refinery. If this refinery now slows down and doesn't buy as much crude, then obviously Russia loses those purchases. But it also loses out on the share of the profits from the Indian refinery as well. So this is a double blow to Russia, but it's also a blow to India and a warning sign that if it continues dealing with Russia and buying large quantities of oil, then a lot of Indian businesses could suffer over the next couple of years if this war continues. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. And thank you so much to everyone that's supported me. If you bought me a coffee, sent me a YouTube super thanks, or signed up as a Patreon, YouTube member, or buy me a coffee member, thank you for that support. Really appreciate it. And here's something to put a smile on your face.